So I'm Carol King. I'm a Hampton Master Gardener and a tree steward with the Cooperative Extension program. And I am here today to talk to you about pruning. The idea is that pruning seems on its face very simple. Get out something like this, to go cut off some pieces of tree, something like this. But if you just randomly take a sharp object and go out there and start cutting off pieces of woody plants, you can do a lot more damage than if you just left it alone. So if you do it right, you can really make a difference in the health of the plant, in the productivity, all kinds of reasons you might want to do that. Aside from just being told by someone that this is your job today. But even if someone else decides that you need to prune this tree, if you're going to do it right, you need to understand why you're pruning and why it matters, what exactly you do. It's not that hard as long as you start learning to think kind of like a tree. One of my favorite expressions. So here's the overview. We're going to make some sense, kind of get you in the mindset. So when you think pruning, you start thinking, don't think tool, plant, think in your mind. Think, what am I doing? This is a living thing, and I'm interacting with it. So you put yourself in that mindset. Doesn't take very long. You can still move along swiftly, but you just pause for a minute and respect that living thing that you're looking at. So we'll look at a couple of key principles. We'll talk about some techniques and some tools and safety factors, and that'll be it. Then you can go out and practice. Right, next. So, like I've already said, trees are alive, and they aren't all. If it's a dead tree, have at it. Get your chainsaw. You're just trying to remove debris. Although I will observe that from a wildlife perspective, you may want to leave, if you have the choice, you may want to leave a snag, a standing stump for the sake of woodpeckers or other things. Diseased dead tissue you need to remove, but trees fall in the forest and they decompose and we don't worry about picking them up. But if it's in your front yard or it's in the park and it could be a hazard, then so if it's dead, it's dead. But we're going to talk mostly about live trees and woody shrubs. So things that require some kind of sharp tool to do anything with. So the idea is not just what you want to do, but what the tree is going to do then afterwards. The kind of one of the big thumping points to make about this is that trees respond. Trees and plants, woody plants, pruning encourages growth. It stimulates growth. So anybody who comes out and says, I just want to keep it small, it's going to react. And if you don't have an idea what it's going to do, then surprise, and you just may have made your life much harder. So the point is, figure it out ahead of time. Don't find out by accident. So that's why pruning. There are basically three reasons why you might want to be pruning. There are three reasons you should have for pruning. The first and most important is to improve the structure of the plant. We'll talk a little bit more about this in the next couple of slides, all three of these. The second reason is to improve the functioning of the plant. That is the purpose. The plant lives to take in sunlight, to make food for itself, to get water from the ground, and then to eventually have reproduction. Flowers, seeds. That's its goal in life, is to take the energy from the sun and turn it into seeds. And if you can help by arranging the access of its leaves to the sunlight, things like that, that's a good reason. And preference is number 3, and it's deliberately number 3, because that's most of why people prune, is because they think they should, or they like the look of it, or who knows, or because they put it in a place where it's too big and they just want to keep it smaller, and then they're fighting a losing battle. So also, as just a general, on the level of individual plants in the landscape, generally speaking, we are removing part of the plant tissue if it's dangerous, if it's diseased, if it's damaged, or if it's dead, with a caveat that it's in the way somehow, and not necessarily, but so dangerous, disease, damaged, dead, that's a category of itself. Right, next. So pruning for structure. What we're trying to do is help the plant deal with where it is, the situation it's in. One of the differences between plants and animals survive and protect ourselves. We further our aims by moving around. The plant can't do that. The plant is stuck where it is. So in order to survive, if you look at the picture on the left, that is a deodar cedar, as I believe I recall, and the bulk of that greenery you're looking at underneath the top is ivy that for some reason was not, it's been there an awful long time. Picture the effect when a big gust of wind hits that thing. It's like a great big sail, and the roots on that plant have to be, pretty sound in order to be able to withstand pressures. Kind of amazing that it's still there. The next 2 slides on the right, they aren't the same tree, obviously, but the one in the middle is a very young tree, and you can see that it has codominant stems coming up. They are, let me see if I can do this. Oh, I can. There's a mouse. All right, right there is these 2 stems are basically they're the same size, and neither one is in charge. Oops, sorry. No, let's go the other way. All right, neither one is in charge. So where they join is inherently and engineering wise is a weak angle. The way the branches, the way they grow together is by the branches and trunks, by overlapping the tissue, the vascular system from each side, they overlap at the joint. And if it's too tight, then that's weak. This is better. One goes up, one goes sideways. Now, the reason we want to catch it when it's little like that is we don't want it to turn into this. This tree is no longer there. It was cut down by the city as a hazard, very serious hazard by the size of the tree. But it all started back there with this. So that's one of the big reasons that we go in and look particularly at young trees to try to reduce the possibility of hazards like this. So, all right, pruning for photosynthesis. We want to let in the light. You just remember that the leaves are what feed the tree. We're not going to keep them alive with Miracle Grow on the roots. They need the sunlight, and any leaves that don't get enough sunlight aren't going to prosper. So but one of the cautions we have is called lion tailing, and that's this picture right here, where all the leaves and little branches have been removed up to the outer end. So it's kind of like it's got little pom-poms. People they like to do this with topiary. They like to do it with small leafed conifers, and some of them can withstand that very nicely if they're small. You don't generally see this in any size of plant, and you really don't want to do it on regular trees because these are wind catchers. The wind's just going to come up just like a pom-pom. The wind is going to come up and toss those around and put extra stress on the tree. So this is one of the big watchwords in pruning lately is avoid the lion tailing effect. Don't clean out too much in the inside, but some, and then we want to improve the airflow to discourage mold. And then other pests that come along when it's nice and damp and dark. And then you get, diseases and insect effects and so forth. And overall, what we're doing is channeling the plant's productivity. We want to help the plant do a better job of being a plant. All right, pruning for preference. This is the most likely reason that you're out there pruning. It's a hedge, and they want a hedge, and it's getting in the way of the sidewalk. Okay, well, fair enough. But it's, this is where you run into trouble with pruning that hurts the tree or the shrub or whatever, because you're not asking the plant. The plant's doing what it knows how to do. And if it's growing somewhere where you don't want it, one of the things to think about is, why is it growing there? Is it because it's not getting enough sunlight in the right place? Is it because it's too big a plant for the spot? Who knows? But the plant's doing, it's doing the best it can. So if this is aesthetics that you're going for, be sure that it is survivable for the plant, or that the plant is the right one for the place. And then there's the exotics. We all love exotics, interesting effects and so forth. Vitex, if you want to look that up, I didn't put a picture in, but it's a really pretty plant, beautiful flowers, lots and lots of sprouts, and it's kind of a pain to maintain. And then I do have a picture of this. Oh, there is a Vitex. There's a pretty flowers, but it just puts out, this is a Vitex. This is a Vitex after pruning a whole mound full of, we pruned out the standard quarter or so out of this one, and that's after. So if you can picture, all right. And here's an Espaliered. This is a Southern Magnolia. This is a very grand, big one down at the Veterans Administration here in Hampton. They get really large, but if you happen to be a little farther north, this is at the northern edge of their range. If you're a little farther north, or you have a nice sunny garden and you really like the magnolia, but you don't have room in this little courtyard for this tree, then this has been trained. This is specialized pruning year after year to trim out anything that isn't fitting in the pattern. It's not going to grow as fast. It is going to require a little extra attention, to water and so forth, but perfectly feasible. Fruit trees are often grown this way because it's much easier to pick the fruit and you can keep it small. So that's pruning if you want to undertake that too. All right, now we're on to principles. The first principle is to figure out what you're doing before you start. What are we doing today? You've got a task to go out and deal with, with a maple tree. Why are you pruning it? Is it because it's got some limbs that are counterproductive? It's overhanging the sidewalk. It's it's got broken branches. We do, one of the things we look for in terms of structure, and I didn't put any slides in, but branches that are crossing and rubbing, generally we try to remove them unless they've actually fused together, because that crossing and rubbing action within a matter of months, particularly on a thin-skinned tree, will create an open wound on both sides. And that can let in funguses and insects and things. So that would be an example where we're pruning for structure. Are we pruning just because it's gotten awfully thick and we need to open up and let some air in? Fair enough. Camellias, often you need to do that once in a while. Or is this purely aesthetic, in which case, whose taste, and make sure you understand, and then will the tree sustain what you're being asked to do? So you want to minimize the cuts, optimize your time and energy, and leave the plant better than you found it. Just because somebody thinks it needs to be pruned doesn't necessarily mean it really does. So have a conversation if you can. Second principle, know your plant, more or less. I mean, you may not know the botanical name, or you may know it's a maple, but not what kind of maple. But the idea is to understand how that tree is likely to grow. This one here is going to be a tall buddy. It's a central leader tree. And so your actions are going to be to contribute to keeping that nice central leader in charge, meaning you would probably reduce, if these up here were getting too big and threatening that leader status, then you might be reducing them back some. You might be thinning out a few bits of these branches if it's a little thick. This one here is going to spread this way. It's going to get real bushy. So what you're probably going to be doing is looking to see if there are there too many stems? Some plants that look like this spread by roots, and there'll be more coming up over here and over here, in which case you need to be doing your pruning with a shovel. Right, help that, from taking over the world. Or you may be just removing a couple of the older woody stems if they're not productive anymore, and then just shortening some of the limbs maybe, but it helps to know. And then I give you this one here, which normally, this is a blue spruce. Normally you don't prune blue spruces anyway. They have a lovely shape and they don't really need it, but it's a little warm here for them anyway, so you don't see a lot of them. But somebody put this plant in here, and no amount of pruning, which they did some, no amount of pruning is going to make that tree fit in that space. This picture is about 10 or 12 years old, and I went by that place recently, and that tree is in fact it's about to go. It's looking very sad. So anyway. All right, third principle, set limits. So the idea there is the principle is actually you don't want to take more than a quarter, or stretching it maybe a third of the volume of the foliage at any one time. Ideally at any one year, but if you have to come back in a couple of months and take a little more, okay. Depends on how vigorous the tree is. If it's a young tree and it's growing quickly, you can probably get away with some more. If it's an older tree or one that is just not got a lot of vigorous growth to it, then you probably want to even think about that quarter. May not be a good idea. And one of the things to do is set a location to put the debris, as you, instead of just trimming, trim, drop, trim, put it all in one place. And when the size of that pile looks like it's getting up to a quarter or a third, stop. You can come back, but don't overdo it. Unless you have a plant that is really on, things are not right. Something bad has happened to it. Hopefully, if its root system appears to be, if the problem is not the roots, so if the root system appears to be strong, let's say hurricane comes through and knocks off a bunch of branches, but the roots are probably fine. So in this case, you can think rejuvenation. This basically what you're doing is you're severely challenging the tree to grow some new stuff. You cut down to the ground or close. You can do this over, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later as well, over several years. And some plants respond to this much better than others. Crepe myrtles, for example, do this really well. You cut them off and they'll come back. Here you go. So some more on this. If you undergo a regimen of rejuvenation on a tree or a big shrub, and it doesn't work in 3 or 4 years, it's still not doing what you want it to. It's growing funny. It's not growing. If it was too big for the spot, it's going to wind up being too big for the spot. So then reconsider whether that should even be there. Check to see if there are any persistent diseases, soil-borne diseases, for example, or root issues, root rots and things. That's not going to work. So anyway, enough on rejuvenation. Okay, some exceptions. Bonsai. Everybody knows bonsai. Bonsais are cute, neat little plants. They work because the people who maintain them spend a lot of time, and every couple of years they take the plant out of the pot and they prune the roots very carefully and put it back so that the top is not trying to produce more food for a bigger root system than it can. I mean, the food production capability of the leaves is matched to the roots. And then there's obviously a lot more to it than that, as far as making sure it's getting nutrition and the like. Topiary, well, what you see here, these little clipped hedges are a form of topiary, and they have to be trimmed pretty often. One expert I heard talking about his topiaries he was out there once a month. Had some very intricate things, but there are some plants that will tolerate being clipped like that. Boxwood is one. Yew hedges are another. But you don't just willy-nilly start out making anything and everything a topiary. You need to research what the plant is. But if you've got it, do some research. You can do it. And then I want to talk about one that's a big endemic here, and that is Pollarding or Pollard. It's a way to maintain a tree that is appropriate, that is one that produces shoots readily, to maintain it at a small size. It's a very, very old technique, been in use in Europe for 1,000 years or more. I mean, there are, I don't think there's any out there that are more than probably 100 years old or so. But the ones you're looking at right here are the trees. These are crepe myrtles at the Elizabethan Gardens in Roanoke, North Carolina, on Roanoke Island. And what happens is every year they are cut back to, let's see, do I have? Okay, I don't have another picture of it. Every year, the shoots that are this year, the last year's growth, are cut back. In this case, they're going to be cut back to about here. They're basically, that creates knots, food storage places at the height where you want this tree to be. These guys have been being maintained that way basically since this garden opened in the 1950s. And they're not much bigger than they were 10 years after they started. They've gotten a little bigger over time, but as long as you're religious with it and you don't cut into those knuckles, the tree can keep doing this. And not all trees, but said in Europe, if you go visit the London plane trees or the lime trees, in many cities, you'll find them in the winter time looking like stubs with big lumpy things on the top, but then they sprout out and they're beautiful. So anyway, when you see something that's crepe myrtle, that's when you go and you cut it off here over and over again, and you're only going to do that a couple times before you kill the tree. So don't do that. All right, suckers and water sprouts. This is one of those exceptions to this is just part of cleaning up. So these suckers here, this is a tree that is grafted at the roots, and these suckers are coming from the root stock, which is a different tree. So you definitely want to get rid of those. And then these are water sprouts, all these things growing up. What that's their emergency responses by the tree to not having enough foliage. So they're not productive to the look of the tree because they're all going straight up. And your response is to go cut them off, but there's a reason they're there. So maybe this one could have its branches improved, some of the suckers gone, some of the water sprouts gone, and then and then just try to encourage more good branches. Like, see, this was a poor pruning cut right here, and it's sprouted, and so this whole branch is kind of wasted, but could be rescued. Hedges. We'll talk about hedges briefly. This is very cool. People tend to do hedges like this, but if you do a hedge like this, look how much more leaf surface is available to make food for the plant. So try to make a hedge that optimizes the amount of surface that the leaves are going. And then this one here, you can see there've been little holes made, so that the inside is not this dark place with just a shell of leaves on the outside. It's actually getting some light and air on the inside, which encourages it to grow. And conifers, most conifers, not all, but most conifers cannot regrow from tissue that doesn't have any live nodes in it. So if you cut back a branch on a conifer past where there is green needles or growth, that branch isn't going to come back. So you either leave a little green. Typically, you usually try to shorten conifers by pine trees, especially by pinching the candles at the end rather than cutting anything. Try to pinch the candles. But if you get past the green, you might as well just take the whole branch. All right, techniques. Here we go. A little bit on techniques has to do with, this still gets into principles in a way because we are based on plant biology. We're trying to trigger the plant's hormones. Plants have hormones. They aren't like human hormones chemically, but they do the same thing. That is, they trigger other actions. They're what tell the plant that it's time to leaf out, or it's time to put out flowers, or that it's time to put out some new, branches because some of them just got cut off. And they are, they're the plant's prime, they're the brains of its defense, if you will. So, okay. And what you're looking at here, the reason I have this picture, this is a pencil holly, which most of its growth grows straight up, and then there's sky pencil holly, it's called. It's a form of Japanese holly. And they're mostly little branches of leaves, but every once in a while, one of them, in this case, probably because the birds were sitting on it too much, got bent over. It's not broken, it's just bent over. And then what it's done, one of the hormones that's key to our understanding of what we're doing is, we're going to talk about this, apical dominance. The hormone that is the most often thought of in terms of cell elongation and just growth of branches and trunks and things is produced, I'm going to go to this slide first. All right, we'll go back in a minute, is produced in the nodes, as you can see, at the ends of the branches and the tops of the stems. And the production of this hormone in the ends is partnered with a suppression of the production in the nodes that are just below. Nodes being, by the way, where new branches come up. new branches, leaves, twigs, whatever. Okay, I got here, these are nodes right here. So this is a node. This is a node right there. Ooh, there you go. That's a node, that's a node, that's a node. In between is called internodes. So in between is, it doesn't have the ability to respond to hormones. So, and then this is connected to the gravity response. That same hormone is part of the function of how does the tree know to grow up or out or sideways or whatever it's doing. It has a mechanism to sense gravity, and that's connected to its hormones. So when you cut the ends of the a branch that is standing straight up, back to this slide. Okay, when you cut or in this case, it just pulled it over, and now this one out here is not as strong because the ends of the branches are one thing, but the top, the apical dominance, the apex, the top, vertically speaking, has the strongest influence. So pull this one over, and all of a sudden these other little nodes down here said, whoops, whoops, we don't have a top anymore. And so they all started sprouting. Now, if this is what happens when you, okay. Oh, yes. Now on a very large scale, this tree, which is very, very old, at one time, it had a very large trunk, and what remains of that trunk has fallen over. And what happened then, right here, you can see, is this one fell over, and it put up a new vertical trunk. And there's some more in here. This one used to have 7 of these, so it's called the Seven Sisters tree. This is what happens when you, same thing when you cut off. So when you take your cut, so if I take this thing, this little twig here, if I cut it, I want to shorten it. So I have, you can see on this, but it's got a little branch down here, and this is for the sake of working inside the office. This is a little thing, but principle applies no matter how big it is. So if I think I want to shorten this branch, which is kind of long, I could just go in between a node. Well, the part down to the next node is going to die. And then these nodes down here, which have just lost their leader, there's nothing there now, they're all going to pop out. You're going to get growth out of these nodes like crazy. Okay? If that's what you want, that's fine. If you're pruning roses, that probably is what you want. If that's not what you want on this tree, because it takes a lot of energy for that tree to put out that many more branches. Okay, so then you're going to go down here, and you're going to, instead, what you're doing here is you're cutting off, leaving an existing branch with an end intact. And now this is not going to go poof. It's going to redirect its growth out this way, and this will become the new branch. If I want it to grow upright, I could maybe tie it up a little. You can. That's how you do apple trees. Usually this is what they do apple trees like that. But anyway, that and that gets us into 2 main types of cuts. The heading cut was that first one I made. You can see here in this picture, you can see here, there's a node right there, there's a node right there, and we just whacked it off, basically. Now, like I said, roses, it's really weird. First time I tried reading up on pruning roses, I realized that it's absolutely backwards from trees. If they want the flesh, but then again, you cut back the rose, every year or so. All right. The thinning cut or reduction cut, that's this one right here. You're removing a branch or stem back to a live lateral or branch or to the trunk. Okay, so I might, in this case, if I'm continuing on, so I have this branch out here that's very long, right? And there's not really, and there's not really any new branches coming out, but this would be, if I just cut it off down, and we're going to talk about how to do that in a minute. If I cut it off all the way back to the main branch, main trunk, it's not going to poof like the other ones do. So, all right. If you are going to go back to a lateral, like the one I was doing before, then basically you're looking for it to be, so here, this right here, this one is 1/3 of the size of this one, more or less. So this one is large enough to carry, if I wanted to trim it down shorter, I could cut this off here and let this be the new top. Okay. If it's much smaller in terms of the ratio to the big one, then you probably can't carry the load. But you use the basic concept, cut back to a node, or to a lateral. So cut back to a node, which would be this one here. I'm cutting back to a node. Here's the node. Well, I can't see it very well. Okay, there's a node. Cutting back to the node, so there's just a little outside that node. Okay, reduction cut. And here you go. This is what I was just talking about. This is a witch hazel, this one. So here is a view of what we just said. And then this is kind of the most, technically, this is one of two of the most significant things there are to talk about here. This is a heading cut right here. Heading cut. This is what happens the next year. This one is a thinning cut here, or reduction cut. Cut off here. Notice the branch that we just get, reasonable amount of growth, and then this continues growing. So, moving on. Oh, okay. We talked about pollarding, and this one was in the wrong order. Here is a properly pollarded tree that's probably 20, 30 years. This is a different tree, but about the same size. And here's what it looks like in the summertime. It's kind of cool. So when you see this, don't go saying, oh my gosh, they're doing crepe murder. Crepe murder is when you cut off here and then do it again and do it again. You've got to leave all this knuckle stuff. So, because all of this is food storage for the tree. All right, branch collar, that's the other really important part. So when we talked earlier about the codominant stems, and that's an extreme case of where there's a branch and the two sides, or that they've actually go up together and they're the same size. Mostly you have a branch and then the trunk is bigger. If you follow this, so the overlapping vascular tissue from the trunk goes up and then it wraps around. This comes down, its vascular tissue goes this way, but some of it wraps around, and then the trunk wraps around with some, and that is what makes the branch hold up. It also has, because of that, it has some extra hormones, not the same ones as in apical dominance, but it has some extra hormones in here which help it to seal up whenever it's cut. They help protect the branch, all the branch protections on. So you want to try to keep angles like this as opposed to angles like this if you can. But more to the point is this branch protection zone, which, okay, moving on. If you just go ahead and try to make it nice and smooth and straight, I hope this looks awful to you because it should. This is one of a series of 3 or 4 trees I met right after this was done. And then I went back about 4 years later. I was back at the same place and I went to see what had happened. Okay, what you have here is because the sealing process causes the tree to produce wound wood or calluses. Okay, and if the cut is proper, the calluses aren't going to be huge and they are going to help seal over. Now, what has happened here is these calluses are the wound was so huge that it could not cover it. It could not seal it over. So what you're going to see is decay and insects and things getting into this poor crepe myrtle at some point. So what you want to do is you want to preserve that branch protection zones right in here. So some trees you can see kind of a bit of a natural swollen spot, not bark, not messes of bark put together in there, but just the natural tree growing. And then you're going to want to cut like right about through there. Okay, right, kind of at an angle. Okay, as you can see with this line. You may see a bark ridge, you may see a swollen collar. Sometimes it's really visible, depends on the tree. But that's like point number 2. What kind of cut are you doing? And point number 2, respect the branch collar. All right, and we'll talk about 3-part cut briefly. This is if you're doing big trees or shrubs that have long, heavy branches. So let's say this, here I am, and this one is not a little thing, it's something big. And if I am going to, if I need to be cutting it off here, then I'm going to cut outside the branch collar, fair enough. But what I don't want is I don't want this branch to break and rip the bark off down below. So in order to prevent that, we remove a lot of the weight. And the way we do that is by basically cutting through halfway from the underside. And then you go out, let's check here, move out a little bit. Depends on how big the branch is, a couple inches to a foot, probably more like 5 or 6 inches, but depends on how thick it is. But you move out and you cut down from the top, and both of them should be perpendicular to the direction of the grain, so that when the two cuts meet, then the grain in between those two cuts, the wood will just fall off. And then you can go back and cut the stub. I have a picture that is not especially good because these are awful close together, but still, you make your first cut here and make your second cut there. And when you do, the grain that runs right along, right in there, is going to say, oh dear, and it's going to go like this. And so you'll get a piece coming off that is shaped like this. And then all you have is this much weight to take out. So pre-cut is the new word. We used to call it 3-part cut, and I find it easier to remember that way. The latest guidance says pre-cut. And now we're on to tools, and I'm moving on time. This is doing okay. So I've been waving my little hand pruners around. This is your basic tool. You'll notice that it is a side. The blade goes in sideways. Okay. There is another kind that's known as an anvil pruner, and this one would be, if you see this pair of pliers, If I had a flat surface instead of this right here, if I had a flat surface so that this came down and landed on that flat surface, that's an anvil. Like this is an anvil. That would be an anvil set of pruners or loppers, and those will crush live tissue. If you think about it, they're fine for dead stuff, but and then loppers are your kind of hand tool of choice. The one in that picture is this one actually right here. So they're kind of small. They get huge. They can have ratchets. They can have extending handles. They can be on poles with strings to pull and chains to pull. The key to that is you do want to keep the cutting blade toward the part of the plant that is going to remain. That is, because this is much easier to control. This right here, this part is finer, and so you get a better placement of your cut if you put this side inside. But you can, that gets to be habit after a while. If you are using saws, hand saws are wonderful. They're much faster than you would think. Hand saw is equivalent on a pole. Takes a little practice. Reciprocating saws are very useful because they make a relatively fine cut, but you can actually work on roots if you have to be cutting roots. And they're not as big or as heavy or as potentially dangerous as chainsaws. So if you're using chainsaws, you need the proper training. You need the right equipment. You need to know what you're doing. Clean your tools regularly, and if you are pruning because something is diseased, then you need to wash out. You can use Lysol or alcohol. Clean your tool between plants at least, and if it is known that it is a communicable disease like fire blight, say, then you're going to want to actually have a rag with alcohol or something and clean between cuts. Hard to do on a chainsaw. You have to think about that. I don't use it myself. All right, safety thoughts, hard hats. If you're working overhead, all this should be a no-brainer. I mean, it should be very familiar. If it's something up there that can hit you in the head, put a safety hat on. If you're working in a shrubby plant or one that has a lot of whippy branches, like this guy, a lot of whippy branches here. If this was any size at all, I would need to protect my eyes. Safety glasses. If you are cutting off heavy branches and know where they're going to fall, if it's bigger than you can hold in your hand, then either have somebody tie a rope to it so you can control where it goes, or make sure that there's nobody under it. I don't recommend that. You really want to know where it's going to go. Think through, don't cut and then wait to see what happens. And then a final one there is toxic hazards. This oleander that's right here, they are a little marginal here. They usually make it through the winter. They are cut back in the summer. That is the time when they're growing most vigorously. So if you have them and you want to keep them from getting quite as big as they do, then you would be cutting them in the summer. Their sap is highly toxic. So you want to watch that. There are a number of plants with milky sap, which tends to be a little bit hard on your skin. Beyond that, just and you know enough to look out for poison ivy. I mean, it isn't just the tree that may be toxic. So pay attention, know your plant, what we said a long time back. All right, page down, I have a parting thought. Plants have been around a long time. You know, they actually know how to grow better than we know how to tell them to. If they're not growing the way we want them to, we need to try to understand why, and then see what it is we can help them do or respond to or recover from. Or maybe put a different plant in. They will reward our effort. Little effort to try to understand what we're trying to do goes a long, long way. When you see a tree like this one, it really doesn't need pruning, and it knows what it's doing. So respect the trees. And I would ask for questions if we were all in person. And that's it. Thank you.